Reading your story, it is, many, I mean, the stats are out there, millions of children suffer really difficult things. Yours is one that isn't just, this one situation happened. I mean, it's a compounding from the time you were born into a difficult situation, into another difficult situation, into now you don't have the skills to be a teenager, which leads to many difficult situations. How do you, looking back on that, frame that and get to the place where you're comfortable talking about it?
Well, I think I think for me and the people that I try to help, or I try to share my experience to help them with theirs, is I just took a very objective point of view on it. It took me a while when you're in the middle of it, when you're a victim, obviously at a young age, you don't have the conscious awareness, and you don't have your own personal development at that stage where you understand what to do, and frankly, at the time, and I think still today, most people that are in the situations and trying to support people in those situations, they don't really have the awareness either. We're all just trying to get through it. So for me, it was just really the story was blocked until I was almost 39 years old. I remembered some things, and I had really been struggling for the first part of my life. And then so when the story came out, when I pieced it together, I literally hired investigators and interviewed family and friends and teachers and police officers and detectives and social workers. And when I had this whole story that I went public with initially, well, it was like, no wonder I was feeling the way I was feeling. No wonder I was struggling. No wonder I was making a mistake. So the nice thing about your story is it can explain to you why you're feeling the way you're feeling, or why you were doing what you're doing. So it was easier for me to be objective. And then honestly, the people that were helping me, they were objective as well. They weren't caught up in the story. They just remained very neutral about it, and got me to look at it in a very neutral way. Because by this time, I'm an adult. I'm no longer a victim. I was struggling with how I felt, but I wasn't really struggling. I mean, in context of what my life was like, I wasn't really struggling, but I sure felt like I was. So.
And it seems like, from your childhood that there's these two parts of it, right? You have to come to terms with people who did things to you,
Mhm.
people who didn't protect you. There were these adults around you who weren't really doing their jobs. And then there's also the forgiveness, perhaps, that you had to give yourself for some of the choices that you made when you were 18, 19, 20, 14, 15. There were these, and some people I think can't separate those two things. And it sounds like you approached it from I'm going to separate the pieces of the story. I'm going to look at the things that happened to me, and then I'm going to come to terms with the things that I did because I wasn't equipped. Is
That's
that
right.
is that fair?
Yeah, that's very fair. That's kind of the idea, is that when you put your story together, and including your story is the things that you were taught to believe, or the rules, values, biases, prejudices that you were brought up and, in a lot of cases, forced to adopt. When you evaluate all that, like I always tell people, one of the chapters in my book is what's wrong with me. People keep going, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? And I was doing that. I'm making these mistakes as an adult or a young man. And then later in life, I go, what the heck's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? And I never got an answer to the question. I wasn't asking the right question. I should have been asking, what's wrong with what happened to me? What's wrong with what I believe? What's wrong with how I was treated? What's wrong with how I reacted or responded? Those are better questions, and they're more evaluative, and you can look at it objectively. And that was really the key. So the first part is really, assembling your story really helps. Telling your story frees you from the story. I just kept hearing, the truth shall make you free. And I just wanted to tell the truth about how I was feeling. I wanted to tell the truth of what I went through. And when I did that, then, a lot of the negative emotions and feelings fell away really, really quick, like fast.
And you were able to find people, you talked about it, briefly earlier, to help you. And also they kind of fell on both sides of the spectrum, right? The people that you hired to go just fact find.
Mm-hmm.
And then I suspect that there were medical professionals, therapists helping you deal with the emotional part of what you had to heal through. And of all, we've had this podcast for a while. We've talked to a lot of people with a lot of different stories. I don't know that I've ever met anyone or had anyone on who has taken quite the investigative approach to their own background. People, it feels like either focus on constructing the story, going back and, looking at it objectively, or they focus on their emotional, dealing with what's left of the story. And you did both simultaneously. So if you had to pick between the two, which one helped you more, or can't you pick?
Oh, I could pick easily. Yeah. I think fundamentally one of the biggest problems that people face that have suffered like I've suffered stay on the emotional side. I think primarily our system around our own mental health kind of stays on the emotional side. So I guess I was lucky enough and listen, I was in a lot of therapy with a lot of people that weren't able to, figure out what was wrong. But I happened to come upon a lady, a counselor, and I guess she knew me well enough fairly quickly that as a businessman, we took a very business-like approach to it. And she was very practical and said, listen, Doug, like your way is not working. You're struggling. You're making the mistakes in your life. You really have no idea about your past. Because in therapy, they ask you the typical family history questions, and I couldn't answer them. And she said, I think there's abuse in your past. I go, there's no abuse in my past. I mean, my parents, I remember they were alcoholic. I remember some of that stuff, but primarily it was blocked out because I could not answer her questions. She said, well, there must be something in your past. And if you want your future to be better and brighter and your way is not working, you might want to take a look at the past. And so I would definitely, and I'm very objective with people I work with. I'm very non-judgmental. You could tell me anything about your story. I would not budge. I learned a strategy that counselors use. It's called unconditional positive regard. And so I started to use that on myself. And I use that with other people. So I would definitely take the objective approach because we just aren't really good at living from an emotional perspective. We let our emotions run our thinking, and that's not effective.